So after the surprise success of Saw in 2004, you had to think that they were going to pretty quickly follow up on it. And you would be right in assuming that, as less than 2 years later, Saw 2 was released. And if you thought the first movie made a lot of money at $103 million, this movie made even more, grossing $147.7 million worldwide on just a $4 million budget. And while it's not overall the highest grossing Saw movie worldwide, in the United States and in Canada, to this day, no movie in the franchise has made more money than Saw 2. But then of course we have to bring up the question, was it a worthy successor to the first movie? Well, they had more of a budget this time around, although interestingly enough, this movie was actually 10 minutes shorter than the previous film. This movie also goes a lot more into the backstory of the Jigsaw Killer, and we get a little bit more information on his motives and why he's actually doing these things to people. And instead of 2 people trapped in a room this time around, we got 8 people trapped in a room, as they all try to find their way out of a house before infectious gas ends up killing them. One of them is the son of a detective, Eric Matthews, who is trying desperately to save him while getting information from the Jigsaw Killer himself. This movie also established a precedent of major tie-ins and arguably over-reliance on the previous films, and you'll see what I mean during this. I'm not quite sure I can say it had the same magic as the first film, but it definitely held its own. But how well did it stack up? Well, let's find out as we take a look back at Saw 2. So the movie starts with a man named Michael who has some kind of spike box strapped around his head. It looks like his eye has been screwed up pretty badly. This may come as a shock to you, but Michael has been trapped by the Jigsaw Killer, who is trying him with the crime of being a police informant who snitches on others for a living. In order to free himself from the spike mass, Michael has to cut open his own eye to retrieve the key that Jigsaw put inside of there. Michael struggles with the decision, but finds himself unable to do it, and well, you know what happens next, the mask closes and kills him. So the next day or whatever, I assume, we get introduced to the main character, Detective Eric Matthews. Matthews seems to be going through a rough patch in life, getting divorced from his wife, and he has a very contentious relationship with his young son Daniel. Eric gets called into a crime scene by his former partner, Detective Allison Carey, where they identify Michael's body. But that's not the only thing they identify, as turns out the Jigsaw Killer has written "Look closer, Detective Matthews" on the ceiling, because that's not at all creepy. Matthews initially refuses to help Carey hunt Jigsaw, but that night during his sleep he remembers the name of the steel company put on the mask and deciphers that it must be where Jigsaw is located. The next day, them and SWAT officer Daniel Rigg lead a whole last raid on the steel facility, and after some minor hiccups, they find the Jigsaw Killer literally just chilling there. They find out that Jigsaw's real name is John Kramer, that he has terminal cancer, and they're about to bring him in until he informs them that their problems are just beginning. This leads Matthews to uncover a row of monitors, which reveals multiple people trapped in a house, including his son Daniel. The other victims trapped in the house with Daniel are named Xavier, Jonas, Gus, Laura, Addison, and Obi, and also there's some passed out lady on the floor. The passed out lady wakes up though, and it's revealed to be Amanda Young, one of the victims from the first movie, and the only known survivor of the Jigsaw killings. Amanda's been here before, so she already knows what to do, and frantically searches for a tape, which she eventually finds. On the tape, the Jigsaw Killer reveals to them that there's a deadly nerve agent encasing the entire house, and in 2 hours it will kill them. Also, the front door will not unlock for 3 hours, but luckily, hidden throughout the house are antidotes to the nerve agent. But of course, this is a game, so all they have to do is find them, and no doubt go for some terrible trap to get them, but we'll get to that. They're also given a key to the door in front of them, which they are told not to use. Being dumbasses, they use it, and Gus, who is looking for the peephole, is shot right through the eye. And after that little incident, Amanda aggressively explains to them that she's done this before, and that if they want to survive, they have to play by the fucking rules. Meanwhile, Detective Matthews sits down to have a one-on-one conversation with John, who tells him that all he has to do is sit here and talk with him, and eventually, he'll see his son again. Back in the house, meanwhile, the remaining 7 find a basement area, where they find the first tape addressed to Obi. It's revealed on the tape that Obi took part in the kidnappings, and his game is he has to crawl through the furnace to get 2 of the antidotes. Laura then realizes that Obi was the one that kidnapped her and brought her to the house in the first place. With the whole group turning against him, Obi decides to crawl for the furnace. After he pulls down the second antidote though, the thing starts to light on fire. They are almost able to get Obi out, but he burns alive and dies right before they can, and also he dropped the antidotes inside of there. Meanwhile, Matthews is still talking with Kramer, who reveals to him that after he was diagnosed with cancer, he tried to commit suicide. He somehow survived, which led him to valuing his life, and started to create the games so that people would value their own as well. Meanwhile, back in the house, the survivors continue to ponder what the connection is between them. The reason they need to know this is that there's a safe in the main room which contains an antidote, and Jigsaw told them that the answer is in the back of all of their heads. They eventually find another secret room, and this time, the tape is addressed to Xavier. Xavier's tape reveals that he's a drug dealer, and in order to get the antidote, he has to crawl through a pile of needles, get a key, and open a door to retrieve it before the door locks permanently. But Xavier, being just the biggest of assholes, decides screw that and throws Amanda into the pit instead. Amanda angrily shifts through the needles and is actually able to find the key, but Xavier is not able to unlock the door in time. Xavier is angry at her failure, even though, he fucking threw her in there, and he decides to go off on his own. Meanwhile, Detective Matthews is taking a new strategy. I'm just gonna burn all of Kramer's shit in front of him and see if that pisses him off. This actually does not piss Kramer off, and in fact, he reveals the reason why all those people are in the house. All of them, with the exception of Daniel, were framed and falsely put in prison by Detective Matthews, and, well, if they find out who Daniel is, he's probably in trouble. Meanwhile, back in the house, Xavier makes his way back into the safe room and checks Gus's dead body, revealing a literal number on the back of his head. Xavier has figured out the puzzle. The numbers in the back of their head are quite literally stitched into the back of their heads. Unfortunately for Jonas, he too goes back into the literal safe room at the time, and Xavier attacks him. Jonas gets the upper hand and takes Xavier down until he has a coughing fit from the nerve gas, and Xavier hits him in the back of the head with a spiked baseball bat. Jonas obviously dies, Xavier gets his number, and he begins hunting the others. Meanwhile, shit's not going well for Daniel either, as Allison finds a planted picture of Daniel and his dad, Detective Eric Matthews, which reveals the truth to the others. To make matters worse, Laura was unable to take any more of the nerve agent, and she succumbs to it and dies. With Laura dead, both Amanda and Allison decide to leave Daniel on his own. Not for long though, as Amanda finds Jonas's dead body and runs away with Daniel. Xavier finds Laura's body, gets her number, and also unfortunately finds the picture, revealing the truth to him as well. Xavier begins to chase them throughout the house, which Matthews sees on the monitors, which sends him over the edge. Matthews goes into a blind rage and starts to beat the ever-living shit out of Kramer. Meanwhile, Allison finds another secret room with a tape and also a box which contains a needle in it. Instead of, listening to the tape, her dumbass decides to just put her hands in there, and not only does she accidentally spill the needle, but she gets stuck in there as there's razors around her hands. Xavier hears her screams and finds her in her room. He then checks the number on the back of her neck and then leaves her in there to die. Meanwhile, Matthews is still beating the shit out of Kramer, who finally agrees to take him to the house. The rest of the officers get the location of the house themselves, and they too head there. Meanwhile, Amanda and Daniel have locked themselves in the safe room, but turns out under the safe, there's actually some kind of passage. They're able to unlock it using the key from earlier, and they're able to get down in there right as Xavier bursts through the door. Meanwhile, John bursts into the house, and so does the rest of the police, as Xavier chases Amanda and Daniel through some kind of underground tunnel system. Alright, we're now getting to the end part of the movie, and this end part has like 4 different plot twists or whatever, so just stick with me for all this. So first off, Daniel and Amanda make it to the end of this tunnel system, and they end up in the bathroom from the first movie. And yep, Adam's body's still in there, Zepp's body's still in there, and Gordon's foot's still in there as well. Xavier makes his way into the bathroom, and it appears that Daniel has died from the nerve gas. Amanda asks Xavier how he's gonna see the number on the back of his own head, and Xavier decides, good point, and cuts his skin off from the back of his head, revealing his own number. Xavier presses forward to get the remaining numbers, but turns out Daniel's not actually dead, and he slits Xavier's throat with the hacksaw that Gordon used to hack off his own foot in the first movie. Meanwhile, the police in the house reveal another set of cameras, and they turn it off, revealing that the feed they had this entire time was not actually live. Meanwhile, Matthews has made his way into the bathroom, finds Xavier's body as well as the other bodies from before, and sees someone in the bathtub. The person in the bathtub is wearing some kind of pig mask and sticks Matthews with some kind of drug that makes him pass out. Back at the steel facility, meanwhile, where Carrie still is, the timer goes off and a safe in the corner where Jigsaw was originally sitting opens. And turns out inside the safe is Daniel wearing an oxygen mask, revealing that all the events that took place inside the house took place before they apprehended Jigsaw. Meanwhile, Matthews wakes up being chained in the bathroom, and he finds a tape. The tape was recorded not by Jigsaw, but by Amanda, who was working with Jigsaw the entire time. Amanda says on the tape that she intends to basically become the new Jigsaw killer and carry on John's legacy after he dies. Amanda then appears at the door, and much like at the end of the first movie, she says game over and closes the door, leaving Matthews in there to die. So even though there's only 2 movies, we're into this now, so we might as well pull up our first ever Saw big board. And this is pretty easy for me. Even though this movie was alright, it didn't nearly capture the magic that the first movie did, so pretty simple ranking. Saw 1, number 1, Saw 2, number 2. So even with the connections, I felt like for most of it, this movie was doing a good job of being its own thing separate from the first movie, but the ending was, what's the best way of saying this? Overbooked. You know what I mean? Like I feel like they relied way too heavy on the first movie, even going as far as to go into the same area as the end of the first movie, even ending it with the same phrase as the end of the first movie. Like, don't get me wrong, the twist about the game actually taking place earlier was pretty good, but as far as the main ending goes, they basically said, hey, let's just do the same thing from the first movie again, but just with a different person. And I understand the pressure of trying to follow up the first Saw movie, which is an all-time classic horror movie, and I don't think they did that bad of a job, but overall, this kind of gave me the impression that they tried just a little bit too hard. So maybe the inspiration they should have taken from this would be, okay, let's take a step back, and for the next movie, for Saw 3, let's take a little bit more time, and maybe write it out a little bit more, yeah? But they decided, no, fuck that. Going forward, we are going to release a Saw movie every single year, exactly a year apart, and they did that every single year until 2010. So that's right, about exactly a year later, they came out with Saw 3, which made even more money. Was it better? Was it worse? I guess we'll find out next time on Saw Look Backs as we take a look back at Saw 3. That'll be a little while off on the channel though, but we'll be doing more horror stuff soon. Not next week though, as next week we're returning to the Godzilla franchise with the invasion of the Astro Monster. But in conclusion, even though I think they tried a little bit too hard, it was still a pretty solid film. The acting was a lot better in this movie compared to the first film, and the story was pretty good throughout, but to be honest, the traps in this movie, which is pretty much the whole selling point to casuals for the Saw franchise, they weren't bad, they just weren't really anything special. And again, while I like the Amanda connection and everything, I just felt like they tried a little bit too hard with the ending, and it was overbooked. I felt like they could have just stayed with one plot twist, you know? They could have just stayed with the plot twist of, oh, it was all recorded earlier, and that it. But they had to overbook it. They had like, no, we gotta put them in the exact same bathroom, and we gotta do basically the same ending again with the exact same ending phrase. And, you know, you could have just left it at one plot twist and that be it. You didn't have to try as hard as you did, and they tried a little bit too hard, which I think hurt the film in the end. But honestly, I don't think it's a bad film, and I think at the end of the day, Saw 2 is worth a watch. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for my second Saw look back. Again, we'll be back here on the channel next week with Godzilla, Invasion of the Astro Monster. We're doing Scream, we're doing Halloween in the future, we will be doing Saw 3 in the future, we'll be continuing with the MCU, but that is going to be doing it for me this week. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to all 50 of my patrons currently named in the description for your constant support of me and my channels. I appreciate you guys. With all that being said, my name is Noah Taff. This has been my Saw look back at Saw 2, Electric Boogaloo, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.